Welcome to Chapter 19 of our Civil War unit, The War Draws to a Close. Battle of the Wilderness. Once he was put in charge of the army, General Grant began a new campaign to finally take Richmond. Grant hoped to march through the forests of Virginia so he could move quickly and undetected. Lee caught him in Spotsylvania, Virginia in a place called Wilderness, and he sent troops in to intercept Grant. Fighting lasted 5 days, with both sides trying to navigate the dense forest. Grant had twice as many men, but he also lost significantly more. Grant was not worried, though, because he knew he could get reinforcements while Lee could not. After 5 days of fighting, Grant disengaged his troops and marched on towards Richmond. Lee tried to stop him several times along the road, but eventually had to retreat into Richmond and Petersburg. William Tecumseh Sherman. He lived from 1820 until 1891. Some stories say that his birth name was Tecumseh after the Indian chief, but it was later changed to William when he was baptized by his foster parents. He attended West Point and served in the Seminole Wars and the Mexican-American War. In 1853, he moved to San Francisco and worked as a bank manager. While Sherman did not care about slavery, he was passionate about preserving the Union and sided with the United States when the Southern states seceded. He fought in the First Battle of Bull Run, Shiloh, Vicksburg, and took over for Grant in the West once Grant was promoted to General-in-Chief. Total War. Now that he had control of the Union forces in the West, Sherman began his march from Tennessee to Georgia with 90,000 men. Sherman intended on capturing the important railroad city of Atlanta before marching to the sea, taking the rest of Georgia and South Carolina with him. Sherman wanted to make sure the South felt the Union Army's presence through the use of total war. On his way through Georgia, Sherman's army not only would fight Confederate troops, they would also destroy everything in their path, including houses, farms, warehouses, etc. Sherman wanted to break the will of the Southern people so the Confederacy would collapse sooner. The Fall of Atlanta. Beginning in May 1864, Sherman and his troops arrived in Georgia, planning to take Atlanta. Sherman was met with opposition from Confederate troops under General Joseph E. Johnston. Sherman was successful, pushing Johnston back through northern Georgia all the way to Atlanta. In July, Jefferson Davis replaced Johnston with General John Bell Hood, hoping that his aggressiveness would help the Confederates defeat Sherman. Sherman eventually made it into the city of Atlanta, confronting Bell in the city. After 4 months of battles, Sherman successfully defeated the Confederates, and Atlanta was now controlled by the Union, dealing a heavy blow to the South. Sherman's March to the Sea. On November 15, 1864, after taking Atlanta, Sherman gathered his army and began marching towards the coastal city of Savannah. Along the way, he continued his practice of total war, destroying everything, including factories, transportation, houses, farms, etc. Sherman's army met some resistance by Confederate soldiers, but their march was not slowed. On December 20, 1864, Sherman received a message from the mayor of Savannah offering to surrender as long as the city was not destroyed. Sherman accepted these terms, and on December 21st he sent a message to President Lincoln, offering the capture of Savannah as an early Christmas present. The election of 1864. In 1864, Lincoln ran for re-election, this time opting to use Andrew Johnson as his running mate, a former Democrat and Southern defector who could bring balance to the election. Opposing him was former General George McClellan, who promised an end to the war. If elected, McClellan said he would recognize the Confederacy as a legitimate country and begin peace talks immediately. On the other hand, Lincoln wanted to finish the war, preserve the Union, and free the slaves. At first, it looked as if Lincoln would lose, but Sherman's timely success at Atlanta helped to boost Lincoln's popularity, winning him the election by a landslide, 212 votes to 21. Lincoln's second inaugural. Unlike his first inaugural address in 1861, where he hoped to prevent the Union from falling apart, in his second inaugural address, Lincoln hoped to reunite a broken country. While some Northerners wanted revenge on the South for the war that they had started, Lincoln disagreed. He argued that both sides needed to recognize that while horrible things had happened during the war, peace and forgiveness were essential to healing and rebuilding the nation. Lincoln didn't want harsh punishments for the South and instead wanted to return each of the states back into the Union as quickly and peacefully as possible. The Fall of Richmond. While Sherman was busy in Georgia, Grant had taken a large army to Virginia to cut off the Confederate supply line in Petersburg. The siege of the city lasted over 9 months, with Grant relying primarily on trench warfare, foreshadowing the conditions of World War I. By the end of the battles, the Union trenches extended over 30 miles all the way to Richmond. These battles also featured the largest concentration of African American soldiers during the war. By April 1865, Lee and his troops abandoned the city, and the Union Army captured it, leaving the Confederate capital in ruins. Appomattox Courthouse. Unlike previous generals Meade and McClellan, Grant pursued Lee's army after they retreated. Lee hoped to withdraw to North Carolina to meet up with other Confederate troops, but Grant's army was hot on his tail. On April 6, Grant's and Lee's armies fought at the Battle of Sailor's Creek, dealing Lee another defeat. Lee kept retreating, but he was outnumbered, cornered, and short on supplies. On April 9th, Lee met with Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, where he agreed to surrender his army. This marked the end of the Civil War. Summary. Under the leadership of Generals Grant and Sherman, the Union successfully defeated the South, ending the war with the surrender of General Lee at the Appomattox Courthouse. Please make sure you have all the terms and the summary written down.